All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you guys can hear us. Welcome to Why Most Gen AI Pilots Fail and What to Do About It. My name is Phil Ungar. But before we get to that, we're going to talk for the next 60 minutes. We're going to cover some things about Gen AI. Many conversations going on right now about generative AI, and we are coming up with some, some of the pitfalls and then some of the ways to avoid those pitfalls. So Jason, can we go to the next slide, please? As I mentioned, my name is Phil Ungar. I'm President and CEO. With me today, I have two fine gentlemen and colleagues. We've got Jason and Greg. Jason and Greg, would you like to say hello? Maybe just do a little quick introduction.
Greg, how about you kick us off?
Sure. My name is Greg Kreutzer. I'm the Director of Operations here at Cadeon. As one of my many roles here at Cadeon, and the one that I find most interesting is helping organizations with their AI transformation journey. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Greg. My name is Jason Jenkins. I spent the last nearly 30 years of my career in the tech sector based here out of Calgary. In the last few years, 3+ years, focused on AI and machine learning, and I'm part of the Cadeon team, and I'm the Director of AI, Machine Learning, and Delivery here. Excited to be part of this conversation.
Awesome, guys. Well, I look forward to it as well. And for the folks joining, please, let's make it a little bit interactive. We'd like to see some comments from you, any questions that you have on what we're going to talk about today. Well, let's start with this picture. So what we have found, and I think it's been through traditional AI and Gen AI. So if you do the AI first, you could be in for the train wreck, right? You see how that's a bullet train when we're talking about doing data first. So, it's interesting how data is growing. I was saying to Jason just before we started this, that the knowledge of mankind is doubling every 12 hours. So that's twice in one day. Now, that might not appear to be a lot in business because people say, well, hey, I just have so much business data. But when, it's a finite amount. But when you think about everything that's connected, all the different devices that are out there today that are connected and producing data, for some of the folks maybe on the call, locomotives, just like these trains. They are data centers. There's so much information emanating from a locomotive. It's quite something. Even buses, like anybody that takes a city bus, there's information about how that bus is operating. There's information about the passengers on that bus, how many stops, how many people get off. All that is just a huge data thing. So as we live in this connected world and as we look towards Gen AI, even traditional AI, it all boils down to the data. So a lot of this has to do with the human in the loop as well. So it's not to say that we're just going to turn it all over to agents and let it do its thing. So the human in the loop actually is going to be talking about some of the things we're going to talk about today when it comes to governance and whatnot. What else am I think I'm almost done here. Yeah. So with that, please, more interaction is better. Happy to, I'll be moderating the questions and answers as the guys are presenting here. So feel free to ask any questions that you have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason. I think you're next.
You bet. Thanks, Phil. I appreciate this. So, a lot of the challenges that organizations face when they're enabling a Gen AI project, doing a Gen AI pilot, and really most AI initiatives in general are fairly consistent, and that consistency is really what helped shape today's session, and also Cadeon's framework and frameworks that the information that we'll be going through today about AI readiness frameworks and just getting you prepared for successful AI, generative AI implementation. So we'll start by providing a bit of an overview of AI terminology and classification based on function. And then we'll move towards some common challenges, and I'll share some industry stats. And then from there, Greg will take you through Cadion's diagnostic framework that can be applied to any organization and to help you foresee and plan around some of those challenges before they become problems. So we'll touch on next steps at the very end, and then you'll get a better idea of how we'd like to best how you could best move forward. So at the end of this, we hope you understand and have a better understanding of some not only some general terminology and stats, but also how to employ a successful AI initiative. So we should be about 45 minutes of presentation time and have some time at the end for questions. So let's get started. So first, I just want to make sure that we're working from a common language. And so, one of the most, I'd say, common sources of confusion when I talk to people about what I do and working within the AI space. And I think probably one question that comes up is that everybody speaks about artificial intelligence and AI in to describe really different things. Like if you're talking to a board member, you're often talking to them about generative AI tools. Those are very relevant and prevalent in today's market and in the news. Generative AI tools like Copilot or ChatGPT, and there's often a lot of interest there. While maybe an operations manager might be speaking to something like predictive maintenance and or anomaly detection. But both of those examples are AI, and they're both valid, but really they're quite different. So when I'm asked about AI, I prefer to speak about function really more than anything. What does the AI solution actually do in the problems that it solves, versus the technologies which can cause a lot of people to glaze over very, very quickly. I find that just going through by function really helps resonate with business stakeholders and folks like yourselves on this call to help understand and wrap their heads around some of these concepts so that they could get the greatest value from their investments and really figuring out how they can best start. So 3 common functions, and this isn't a fulsome list, I think, but it does help us kind of structure the conversation today. The top one being predictive AI. So predictive AI really, in its simple form, uses statistical models and machine learning to really find trends in historical data. And using those trends and those elements in historical data, they could then be used to forecast what happens next. So if there's enough history in that information and enough information about what happened in the past, AI could be used to predict those what's likely to happen next. So this one is probably the most mature category. It's been around in enterprise use for over a decade, and the concepts much before that. When I'm thinking about some examples that might be relevant to this team, you think maybe in the oil and gas industry, you might have predictive maintenance, where you have models analyzing temperature or vibration or pressure readings and flagging when a piece of equipment might be ready for approaching failure, ready for maintenance, and you make a anticipatory call to then do maintenance, preventative maintenance, instead of a costly repair maintenance downstream. I think the big requirement here, when Phil was talking about data earlier on, the key requirement here is structured historical data, and typically lots of it. That data needs to be consistently clean and classified, and really that's where data readiness, which we'll talk about in the upcoming slides, that's really where the heart of it lies. So predictive analytics and AI think very large data sets that can be used to drive those models. Generative AI, on the other hand, is built on what's called large language models that are trained on immense volumes of data, like entire the entire internet of data to train these models. And what it does really is help. It reads, understands, and then generates a human-sounding response. Think of a common use case here would be using a generative AI solution like a Copilot or a ChatGPT to summarize and synthesize a data to create drafts, email drafts. I think everybody on this call, if you haven't, I do recommend playing around with a ChatGPT or something along those lines. I think you'll find it very powerful. That is a generative AI solution built on those large language models. So, and here, I think here we really kind of skewed this conversation to focus on generative AI because that's where a lot of excitement is and a lot of action, and not surprisingly, some of the most I see visible challenges that are coming up as a result. You might hear about them in the news, about data that's being generated, perhaps in legal cases, and referencing case laws that didn't exist, and these tools have made something up. Those are called hallucinations, and really that's where a model, the generative AI model, produces content that sounds extremely confident and extremely convincing, but factually is incorrect. And that can obviously present a whole host of challenges for an organization, depending on how that information is used, and even legal consequences. And we'll talk a little bit about this a bit more later. And then finally, agentic AI and AI agents. These are based in generative AI, with the back end kind of using generative AI in many cases. They're capable of taking autonomous multi-step actions across systems to accomplish goals. So you give it a goal and the agents figure out how to plan and sequence events, and they use tools to execute, sometimes with, or what Phil was mentioning before, without human approval at each step. So that human in the loop element plays a huge factor here. I guess just to give you an example of how this, you could think of call centers, which are taking in calls from people and supplying information back by reading through databases of information to collect a suitable response, sending a response back to those users. Sometimes in a frustrating way, if you've ever been caught on a call with a bot, but sometimes works quite effectively. This is a huge area of growth in AI in the last few years, and expected to keep growing. Back in 2024, this was first introduced. I think about 1% of AI solutions were agentic AI, and that's going to grow to probably closer to 33% in 2028. I think the big thing here, and the reason why we bring up agentic AI, is this fact that it can act autonomously, and the failures that you see with autonomous agents can be very large scale versus simple. And so this is where it's important to introduce the governance around these implementations. So now that any questions or anything, feel free to kind of pop those up, and Phil will help surface those to myself. But if not, we'll just move on. So now on to some common challenges, which is kind of the meat and potatoes of this presentation. So I'd say at least one of these challenges here that you see on the screen will surface in a generative AI pilot project. Ideally, earlier the better in that pilot, but that's not always the case. And sometimes it's when an organization has already went well through an AI solution, and they're just not finding the ROI that they had hoped for. as you go through this information and read through those quotes, I think one thing that really stands out is that these don't really start as a technology issue. They start as a clarity problem, a data problem, a systems problem, a change management and change readiness problem. Oftentimes technology isn't the bottleneck. So let's talk a little bit about problem clarity. Many companies will start AI just for AI's sake. They get caught up in the excitement of generative AI pilot, and there's no real sense of the business problem that they're trying to solve or the benefits that they're trying to gain. No measurable success criteria to judge success of the program. Efficiency gains are often called out here as something that a company wants to gain through generative AI, and but often find themselves struggling to quantify what that means and create a baseline of where they're starting from with that efficiency and where it stands today and what implementing this tool ultimately means. So, generative AI, there's a lot of can be issues with those pilots being abandoned, and really part of those problems, a good part of those problems, are tied to unclear business value and what you're trying to achieve. And that's what we mean here by problem clarity. And I think what separates organizations that get this right versus the people that don't, it comes down to them knowing what specific outcome that could tell us if this initiative succeeded or not. If that can happen early on in the process, then it's better versus trying to be answered at the end. On to data readiness, and just speaking a little bit about data readiness and data management practices for AI. There are a lot of cases of organizations feeling unsure or unclear if they have the right data management practices in place before starting their AI initiative. I believe it was Gartner and just a couple of years ago said that 63% of organizations feel uncertain in this area. And so, there's a lot of data around here, pardon me, a lot of data around this, pretty consistent patterns, I would say. And some of those patterns include, the data exists, but it lives in different formats and locations and various areas that the models can't effectively use. Sometimes that data lives in old PDFs or photographs of old, files that there is no naming convention that's being utilized and no metadata associated with that. And you remember the hallucinations comment that I made in the past. Well, when GenAI is pointed at completely unstructured, unlabeled content without properly grounding it can fill in the gaps with hallucinations. One thing, though, I do want to pause on here, just to clarify. You don't need perfect structured data for a GenAI project to succeed. In fact, organizations that wait for their data to be in a perfect state, before they start an AI initiative, likely will either be very slow in starting or never start at all. I think the important thing here is that structure that we talked about. And it's consistent, file naming and organized file structure, metadata tags that describe what the document contains, labeling of document types, those sorts of things. That can really, it's not exciting work to do, but it pays off quite high. And organizations that invest that upfront time to just put a very small amount of structure around the data that they're pointing their GenAI solutions to, find dramatic increases in response accuracy and relevance. And now moving on to system readiness, there's infrastructure that falls into here, but I think more commonly is a failure of governance that arrives too late, and thinking about systems, not necessarily technical systems, but organizational systems in that case. So organizations that build a Gen AI solution, if they get to a point where at the end start to ask, well, what data sources can this model access? Are we going to start to see external internet data mixed in? And are we sharing our documents safely? And what happens if something comes up and hallucinates, and what do we do with those situations? A big example here is the things like Claude Code or other coding platforms that allow you and users that might not be experienced software developers to start generating very compelling, usable code for their own applications. And so, the importance of creating a strong governance structure to support that movement of that code through servers and into the organization safely is of paramount importance, really. Oftentimes governance around AI doesn't typically fit always so nicely in existing data governance frameworks that have been in place for a number of years. And I think the key thing here is that you sometimes need to create specific and would always recommend creating specific AI-specific governance solutions and implementations, not as a means to create something so robust that it just slows everything down to a grinding halt, but it's to ensure that you're having these conversations ahead of your Gen AI implementation, and you're having them early, so they're not creating massive problems later, not at deployment time. And finally, change readiness. About 70% of AI implementation challenges are related to people and process versus technical issues. Purely technical issues are a small subset, probably about 10%. And a lot of the pattern here is that organizations invest heavily in building the technology, but they don't talk about the adoption rate and how that's going to be managed. And really, adoption starts with awareness and training and making sure that it's the solution that's being developed applies to people's work, and they know how to use it, and they know how to use it confidently. And if you get that right, the implementation will go far, far more smoother. A lot of information here I'm throwing at you, so please jump in if there's any questions.
So Jason,
Yes.
It's very interesting to me because you talked about 30 years in IT, and now I'm getting close to 35. We always used to talk about people, process, and technology.
Yes.
Now I think the paradigm has shifted to people, process, and data, because one of the 4 challenges that you identified, there was no mention of technology at all. So technology is not the issue in 2026.
No. It's often, there's so many AI solutions in the market, and you see, like, in being in the space, I myself, I can't keep up with all the news and the updates from AI solutions and upgrades to platforms. There's so much coming at us at all the time, and you could see the ramp up of activity over the last few years. It's amazing. And and with that, there's a lot of smart people working on these technologies, and the technology at the end of the day is there's a lot of consistencies and strong technology, a lot of great organizations behind this, but often that's not the challenge when you're trying to implement something. Only a small component of challenges are based on the technology alone. It's more the things that surround it.
So, and just so you know, time check here, just because I know you've laid the good foundation here with everything. We're 25 minutes in, and I know we got a few slides to cover, so I just want to make sure. And please, reminder to everybody that's on, if you have questions, we'll probably take questions at the end. So we want to speed through the presentation here so that we can get to your questions. So please start throwing them in the chat.
Sounds good. I think I'll take that hint. And industry insights are exciting stats, and I'll breeze through these. But I just wanted to point out a few stats around these four challenge areas, starting with problem clarity and really taking the flip side of a problem and more of an opportunity here. And just the amount of growth, the revenue growth that can be achieved by organizations that are identified as leaders every year. BCG surveys senior executives for their annual AI report. And these executives are from organizations that are considered leaders in this industry and their implementations. And they're seeing 1.5 times revenue growth achieved in these organizations versus others. And 2 times ROI in their investments compared to everybody else. And I think, what's the differentiator here, I think, is that the companies that are studied knew the problems that they were looking to solve before they built anything. They put the upfront effort in clarifying what that problem is. And it's a gap really that's entirely addressable just if you focus on it up front. A couple of things here about data readiness. The 68% here is measuring the consequence of the right data management organizations, and saying here that 68% that these companies are actively experiencing data quality issues that are impacting their results after the implementation. And this 47% figure, when you think of nearly half of enterprises that have implemented a generative AI solution, made at least one major business decision based on content that the model ultimately hallucinated on and fabricated. So there's a direct connection here between data readiness. Hallucination is not primarily a model problem, a technology problem. It's a data problem, a data readiness problem. And the fix isn't a better model. It's better data foundations before the model is deployed. A couple more slides here, and then I promise we'll pass it over to Greg. Regarding system readiness, 28% of organizations have really formally defined who owns AI governance within their organizations, and over half have no real specific AI policy or still in the process of implementing one. So, of the organizations, I think, general data policies typically don't cover the questions and the issues that AI introduces, and those questions require AI-specific frameworks. And to see that nearly half of organizations either don't have one or are still building it can be quite surprising. And you're talking about governance that ideally is employed and created at the start of the project, not at the end when it's very costly to implement changes. And finally, change readiness. Just wanted to resurface that stat from earlier. Around 35% of employees received AI training in 2024. And on top of that, 74% of those workers rate the organization's training programs as average to poor. All that to say that, I think organizations, though, that have structured upskilling initiatives are really twice as likely in ROI, AI ROI, and that change readiness. It shouldn't be thought about as avoiding failures, but trying to create the most value from the organization and getting the most value from the investment that you've made in a technology solution. So with that, I'm going to pass off to Greg. And I think we could skip past this, but briefly here, I think we've talked about all these areas. There's a clarity of the problem. There's the data. There's a match to the use case that organizations are looking at. They design governance before the deployment, and there's proper access controls, and they build an adoption framework ahead of time before versus being an afterthought. And really, I guess here around what successful organizations do is forethought and taking a deliberate approach. And I think that that's really the heart of what Cadeon and our framework is trying to help organizations accomplish. So I'll pass that off now to Greg so that he could take you through that.
Thanks, Jason. What strikes me about everything we've covered so far is the 4 challenges, the research, the patterns across industry, is that none of it is really about technology. When you look at where pilots actually break down, it comes back to the 3 things that Phil mentioned: people, process, and data. The technology is rarely the bottleneck. What gets in the way is the people are not aligned, the processes aren't ready, or the data is not in a state that the model can actually work with. Sometimes all 3 at once. That is the lens I want to bring to the next few slides. Cadeon's AI best practices framework is built around exactly these 3 dimensions. And I want to show you how it maps to the challenges you just heard about, what a structured assessment of your organization looks like, and what a practical path could be. When you look at the 5 pillars in Cadeon's framework, people, process, and data run through them all. This is not a new technology concept. It's a structured way to make sure nothing falls through the cracks, and to make it clear who owns what. Starting with the people, AI strategy and leadership is fundamentally a people challenge. Someone in the organization has to own the problem statement, define what success looks like, and hold leadership aligned. Without that, even well-funded projects drift. And at the other end of the framework, process and change management is about people too, whether they actually adopt the tool, whether their workflows change, whether they trust the output. Technology delivered to people who are not prepared for it does not create value. The data dimension covers 2 pillars. Data and infrastructure is about whether your data is accessible, governed, and structured enough for AI to use it effectively. Governance and risk is about whether you have defined what the model can access, who's accountable for its outputs, and what guardrails are in place. Both are data challenges. One is about readiness, the other is about control. And process sits at the center through architecture and systems. The primary challenge here is governance, and it is one most organizations underestimate. Questions like what data sources can the model access? Who's accountable when an AI-informed decision turns out to be wrong? What guardrails govern the outputs? These are not questions that fit neatly inside an existing IT security policy. They require a thoughtful design, and the above questions need to be answered before deployment, not when something goes wrong. Infrastructure readiness is on the other side of this. For organization using cloud-based GenAI services, the infrastructure lift is relatively manageable. But if you are hosting your own predictive models, and many organizations in an asset-heavy or regulated industries do, the compute and resource requirements are significant. Predictive models running at scale can generally be resource intensive. An infrastructure that was not sized or architected with that in mind creates a bottleneck that no amount of governance policy will fix. Both dimensions, governance and infrastructure, need to be assessed together. Each pillar has a different owner in your organization. That is by design. A gap in any of them puts the whole initiative at risk, which is why the question is not just, are we ready for AI? It is, where exactly are we not ready, and who needs to do what? Knowing the framework is one thing. Knowing where your organization actually stands against it is another. That is what the Cadeon AI Best Practices Assessment is designed to answer. Across all 3 dimensions of people, process, and data, and across all problem pillars. This is a fixed scope assessment, not an open-ended consulting project. It produces 4 concrete outputs. First, a current state assessment, an honest, evidence-based picture of where you are today, covering your people and your leadership alignment, your processes and governance, and the state of your data. All this with no assumptions. The assessment gives a best practice benchmark where your gaps are compared to what leading organizations actually do and what gaps mean for your AI outcomes you are trying to achieve. We work with you to build a prioritized gap analysis, not a list of everything that could be better, but a clear, sequenced view of what needs to be addressed first, whether that is a people and an alignment issue at the leadership level, a data structuring problem, or a process and governance gap that needs to be closed before everything goes live. Then we follow up with a right-sized roadmap, scope to your organization's constraints, pace, culture, and use cases. For some, that might be a 90-day action plan. For others, particularly in, say, government regulated environments, we may need to build a full-fledged roadmap because these steps take longer to approve and communicate accordingly. But the roadmap should reflect your reality. We run sessions with key stakeholders, either online or virtual. We provide written findings within a week or so. The scope is fixed, the output is fixed, everything you need to make a confident decision about your GenAI pilot or program. Before I hand things back to Jason, I want to leave you with a thought and make the next steps easy to identify, because it looks different depending on where you are right now in your AI journey. If you're still exploring, that's a legitimate place to be. You may still be working through the people side, building alignment, identifying who owns the problem statement. Perhaps you can see some of these people, process, and data gaps in your organization, but want to understand how an assessment would actually work in your environment. So book an assessment with us. We'll answer your questions and help you determine where you are exactly in your AI journey. And if you're ready to move into GenAI, reach out. We can typically scope and schedule assessment within 2 or 3 weeks. Here's what I'll leave you with. AI pilots do not fail because of the model. They fail because the people are not aligned, the processes are not ready, or your data was not in a state the model could use. The organizations that get this right, that they do the readiness work, they build foundations first, and then they see the greatest returns from their AI initiatives. It isn't the ones that move to AI the fastest. With that, back to you, Jason, to close things out.
Hey, just before you start, Jason, Greg, I want to
please.
touch on this slide just for one last little bit, because one of the great things about having you on the team is your knowledge of process.
Mhm.
And my observation has been that a lot of clients, a lot of people that have gone down the path, clients and prospects with GenAI so far, it's always about automating some sort of process, right?
Correct.
And again, like I always, maybe talk about that, because I always say that if you don't understand that process from the end to end, and if you're going to automate part of it, are you just pushing the bottleneck downhill? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Phil. So processes drive out your business objectives, which produce your business value that you sell back to your customer. If those processes aren't properly laid out and logically thought of, implementing technology such as AI will make your processes more efficient and run faster. But if your processes aren't modeled in the right path, you'll just do the wrong things quicker. And sometimes that's good for organizations because it highlights the problem that they have a lot quicker. But to be most efficient, when you model out your process, you make things consistent and repeatable, which fits and aligned with your AI initiatives when it comes to Gen AI, and then more so for you, the agentic AI piece.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Greg. And yeah, like again, I think it's the awareness of the people, the process, and the data, right? So the process goes hand in hand, and I think that can't be understated. So awesome. Great answer.
Absolutely. So just before we move into questions, just kind of resurfacing the information that we shared before, just to close a loop on what we covered today. So we had a bit of a talk about some industry insights, but more importantly, probably shared some language that we could all understand now around different AI functions and challenges and how they manifest themselves. And then, Greg went into provided an overview of our best practices framework and a structured assessment and what that looks like and what it provides. And then we talked briefly about next steps. And depending on where you are, whether you're exploring, curious, or ready to move, we've got options for you. So it's just a matter of reaching out and letting us know. So, I hope you found this information. I hope it resonated with you. I think when we go through some of those challenge areas, I think probably most of you can see how that can resonate and relate to your own organization. And hopefully you took away some good information from here today. So with that, we'll just move on to Q&A and open up the floor.
Yeah, so far no questions from the audience, but folks that are on, feel free to submit your questions. Anything that you Gen AI related, like I'd be curious just from the group that's on, where are you on your Gen AI or AI path? Like, are you just getting started, or are you first projects? Are you running pilots? I know many people are using pilots. I know many people are kind of dabbling, but has anybody implemented something? Like, they have any anecdotes that they would like to share about what was the most challenging piece? Feel free to whatever you like in the chat. Guys, just go back to the assessment that we're offering.
Yes.
The one question that I had when I saw it was length of time. So I know we've got like a quick 30-minute assessment or 15-minute assessment. We have various assessments. Can you talk a little bit about that from a we can be super quick, or we can go deeper for the customers or prospects that are interested in learning more.
Yeah, I can field that one, Jason, if you're.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So yes, we have an initial assessment where we kind of go through at a very high level to get a feel for where potentially there might be some differences between where you actually are today and what best practices are. And then from that, then we go through and build a more in-depth assessment, focusing around some of those initial gaps between where an organization is compared to best practices. And then we deep dive in there. And the assessment is really a series of best practices questions. And then the organization will rate where they are today and where they think they should be. And then based on their culture, how difficult would it be to change from where they are today to where they think they should be? And then we use that information to prioritize where the action plans should be. And then from the action plans, we can formulate the roadmap from that. So a typical assessment for organizations would run anywhere from, say, 9 to 12 hours on a mid-sized to large company.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sounds great. We have a comment here from Ruth. Thanks, Ruth, for your input. Ruth says she's developed an AI agentic tech scout. The major issue right now is bot crawling. My bots can't crawl certain websites to extract information. We were talking about people processing data. I think we have a technology challenge here, potentially.
Yeah.
Ruth, that's kind of a good one. I think that would take a little bit more, not something that we could certainly, we'd certainly get help with, but we'd need a little bit more information for that. But congratulations on going down the path. Love to learn more about how what are the popular tools? Is this Claude? Is this Gemini? Is it ChatGPT? What agents? There's Manus. There's all those kinds of things. And Jason, I think this goes back to and maybe here's some guidance for the folks that are with us today. There are so many tools, right? How do we pick, or what's the guidance?
Yeah. It's a good question. There's a lot of people with very strong opinions on the best platform and what resonates with them most. And I think some platforms are more skewed towards, say, a development support and developer, while some are more focused on content generation, some more heavily research-based. I'm thinking like a Claude Code versus ChatGPT versus, say, Perplexity, something along those lines where we're kind of speaking to each of those areas. But I think having a clear sense of how you want to use the application and what you want to use it for, and then doing a bit of research and recognizing that there's going to be a lot of strong opinions out there, but trying to filter through that noise a bit and pick one that you feel is best suited for you. I think I've found in my experience some of the also the kind of the paid platforms, even a nominal payment if you're using something for yourself, might get you a bit stronger results or a bit more, better results. Yeah, that's the best way to put it, than, say, a free version. And there's also considerations around data security and information security. So making sure that whatever tool that you choose, you're looking at those requirements as well, and making sure that you're not exposing information and key important information inadvertently. So a few factors at play. I think, like anything, having a clear sense of your problem up front and what you're trying to solve, and then going down the path of selecting the most appropriate tool based on your needs is the best way to go.
Awesome. Yeah, agreed. I think, and then there's maybe on a follow-up webinar we can talk about some of the experience and some of the success stories that we're seeing, because we're certainly using a number of tools here at Cadeon as well.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, with that, we have no more questions. I do want to thank everybody who joined today. And just so everybody knows, we will be sending out a recording of today's webinar. So if you're interested in reviewing the content at your leisure, we also publish our webinars back on our YouTube site. So please go to our YouTube site, like and subscribe, I think is what everybody says that has a YouTube site. And we'd love to, this is something that we do on a monthly basis where we're trying to add more content. And if anybody has any thoughts or other topics that they would like to hear us talk about in our interaction with our many clients, love to hear some feedback from the group as well. So with that, gentlemen, thank you again for your contribution, and thanks to our audience for joining us today. We wish you all a good afternoon, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.